Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Carolinas Weather Group. We're happy to have you tonight on January the 13th, a little bit past 8 o'clock, and I appreciate you all tuning in tonight. We hope you've had a good week so far, and you've stayed relatively warm. I know we've had quite the cold temperatures around here, something we've not been used to all winter. So thankfully, we're going to be seeing a little bit of a warm-up before some more cold air moves in next week. And kind of a delayed start to winter with our temperatures here in the south, and also up north where they're finally starting to experience some lake effect snow, and that is our topic tonight. We're going to be talking about how lake effect snow is. I mean, we don't see it here in the Carolinas, so we're going to talk about it from the beginning to the end, and what all the difficulties are forecasting that up around the lake. So we're happy to have Greg D on. He is from Cleveland, Ohio, and we also have Tim Buckley on. You guys are all familiar with Tim. We all know he works in Greensboro, but he was born in upstate New York, so we're happy to have Tim on and kind of talk about his experience with lake effect growing up. A few housekeeping rules before we start tonight. A live broadcast, so if you have any questions, please direct those to us via Twitter or Facebook or Google Plus as well. And if you're watching on the rebroadcast, you can direct those via Twitter. We'll give out the Twitter handles at the end of the show. Also, I do believe all of our previous podcasts are up, so if you go to your favorite Apple or Android store, and you can download those and get caught up on all of our shows. I think that's about all I have for housekeeping rules. This is looking forward to it. I don't know much about snow, lake effect snow, as living in the south. We don't have it around here, so looking forward to the content tonight. We do have almost a full panel. Kit is actually out of town in New Orleans. He's at the AMS conference, so looking forward to have Kit on next week, kind of talk about what's been going on down that way. So I think that is all the announcements and stuff, so I'm going to hand it over to Ricky Matthews, who will kind of start the show tonight. And stick around after we talk about lake effects. Shay's going to talk a little bit about the subtropical storm Alex, and we may try to dive into maybe what could be an active weekend here in the Carolinas. So, Ricky, it's all yours.
All right. It's hard to believe we're talking about tropical weather and the potential for, I shouldn't even say potential, an actual tropical or subtropical storm in January. I think it's like the third earliest on record. We'll have Shay recap that towards the end.
Fourth. Fourth.
Fourth? Yeah. All right. So, appropriately, lake effect snow is our topic this week, and we had a lot of it the past couple of days up in the Great Lakes region. Tim Buckley and Greg joining us tonight. And Greg, I want to refer to you first because you're right smack dab in the middle of it. You're kind of the guy experiencing it all now. First off, since you're a first-timer on our show, introduce yourself a little bit. Tell people where you live, where you work, and your experience with lake effect snow.
All right. I live in Cleveland now. I'm at the NBC affiliate WKYC. But I am relatively new here. I've been here for only about a year, so it's been a learning experience. Before that, I lived in Little Rock, Arkansas, Dothan, Alabama, and went to school at Florida State. So I was as far removed from lake effect snow for a long time. I actually grew up in Connecticut, where once in a while, with a good west-northwest wind, we would get a dusting off of Lake Ontario, if you could believe. So that was the most experience I've ever seen. Was sometimes I'd wake up for school and there'd be this dusting of snow everywhere, and it turns out it came all the way from the other side of the state of New York.
We have a similar situation like that. I'm in the Tri-Cities, Bristol, Johnson City, Kingsport of Virginia, Tennessee, and we end up running into some minor northwest flow lake effect moisture events when we get a light dusting. Some of our elevations pick up 1 to 2 inches. But Tim, when you were growing up, you had a lot more than 1 to 2 inches at your house in terms of snowfall. You ended up, you said, sometimes with 250 inches of snow.
Yeah, it really depended on the year. The thing about lake effect that's so crazy is it's really, really localized. And from year to year, within my county, there would usually be one area that would just get hammered. And the main thing that determines that is the prevailing wind. Whichever way the wind is blowing most that winter is where those snow bands are going to set up. So one year my town might get 100 inches, the next year might get 200 inches, and we can talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but there was a plateau just to my east. It's called the Tug Hill Plateau, which is really famous among lake effect snow. It's about a 600 to 700 foot rise in elevation just downwind from the lake. So my town was pretty much at lake level. If you were on the plateau, they usually got about 100 inches more than what we got. So they were kind of more in like that 300-inch range, which is kind of record-setting along the East Coast. They're often called the biggest snow totals east of the Rockies.
Sounds like a ton of a winter wonderland, especially when you're younger. So, Greg,
it's a good way to get fascinated by the weather when you're a kid, for sure.
Just like growing up on the coast with hurricanes. Greg, let's go ahead and introduce the concept of lake effect snow for some of our viewers who maybe aren't as weather entwined as some of us. Talk a little bit about how it differs from a lot of the major snowstorms like the Northeast Seas or us here in the Mid-Atlantic, and some of the variables that come into play with the moisture in the Great Lakes and the warmth and the ice and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I mean, versus a system snow, so you got to know the lingo, right? There's two types of snow in Northeast Ohio. There's lake snow and system snow. Just like living in Arkansas before this, people knew what Cape was and what shear was. People here know lake snow, they know system snow, and they know the difference. So the system snow, your typical snow, comes with the actual low pressure moving through. The lake snow itself, that comes after the storm typically, and it depends, I guess, which side of the lake you are. I suppose in places like Buffalo, you could get it ahead of an area of low pressure, but here in Cleveland, it's mainly behind a cold front, behind a storm system, and it's really all about wind direction, and a difference in temperature. It's a difference in temperature between the lake and the air above it, and it's really those early cold air outbreaks where you get a cold air mass coming down here from Canada that's really, really cold. The lake is still relatively warm, and in some cases it's still very warm, and you just get a huge transfer of heat from the water in the lake up into the atmosphere. You need a certain amount of wind, but you can't have too much wind. It's kind of like a tropical system where you need the winds to be 25, maybe 15 to 25 miles an hour, but you start getting too high, and it's just not going to work. And you need them all to be in the same direction. And for Northeast Ohio, typically it's north-northwest would be the biggest type of snowfall, especially once you get other lakes involved upstream. We just had an event last night with a west wind, even a west-southwest wind, depending on where you're looking at. And some of the eastern suburbs got quite a bit overnight and this morning. Lake Erie is interesting because compared to the other lakes, it's a puddle. The average depth of this thing is about 60 feet, whereas some of the other lakes go 200, 300. I think Superior goes over 1,000. So it warms up to the mid and upper 70s in the summer, and that's how it goes into the fall, into this lake snow season. But then you get typically to this time of year, and especially approaching February, and the whole thing just freezes over and it's shut down. That is definitely not the case this year. The last time I checked the water temperature of Lake Erie, 5 degrees above average, so it's still very primed for some good lake snow.
And the crucial thing there that I think is very interesting to a lot of people is that when the lakes freeze over, that's it. Your moisture source is gone.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get some flurries. Last year when I got here, it was, and this is saying something, it was the coldest February on record in Cleveland, Ohio. So you got to think that it must have been pretty chilly, to say the least. And there were some Arctic air masses that came down over the lake that produced some very minor flurry bands, even with some ice over the lake. It was really amazing. But yeah, most of the time, once the lake freezes over, any of the accumulating stuff is pretty much done.
And Tim, Greg kind of introduced the wind angle, and we've got a screen share there at Buffalo up. Talk a little bit about how the wind angle is very crucial and why we always seem to hear about Buffalo being the one city that is the northwest or the lake effect snow king.
Sure, yeah, I'll try and do a screen share here too and get just a little Google map up. Can you guys see this?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, cool. So if we look at the map of the lakes, the thing about the winds, there's a term that we use called fetch. If you look at the different lakes, each lake has a little bit of a different orientation. If we look at Huron, the way my mouse is going, their orientation is kind of northwest to southeast. Erie, Lake Erie, like where Greg is in Cleveland or where Buffalo is on the other edge of the lake, this lake has the longest direction going from southwest to northeast. Lake Ontario, which is where I grew up, I have my hometown right over here, that's pretty much due west to due east. So the way the wind blows is really, really crucial, because to get a good lake band going, you want your really, really cold air to be going over the lake as long as possible. The longer it can go over the lake, the more chance you're going to have to collect a lot of that moisture, intensify your band, and that way you can get a really big, strong band instead of a lot of smaller, little bands. So let's just take Buffalo and Cleveland, for example. They're both on Lake Erie. For Buffalo to get a really good snow, and Buffalo can get much better snows than Cleveland, and here's why. If they get a southwest wind that's prolonged, say this wind's coming in from Toledo, it goes past Cleveland, it goes all the way up to Buffalo, they have the whole lake to grow that moisture, to grow the instability, which is a lot like producing thunderstorms, actually. You're rising all that warm air, and they can just get a super killer band into Buffalo. Thunder snow, very common in that type of setup. For Cleveland, I'm guessing, and I don't know a lot of local info about Cleveland, it's probably better for Cleveland to have a northwest wind where you're building energy from up here in Superior down to Huron and then across parts of Erie also. Buffalo's pretty infamous because of all the bigger cities on the lakes, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland. Buffalo is best positioned to get a really killer snow band over most of the lake. Now, where I'm from, we get better snow than Buffalo, and we would rub that in their face a lot. There's actually a trophy. They have a trophy in the upstate New York area called the Golden Snowball. They have the three main cities, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and each year, whichever city gets the most snow gets this trophy. So there's kind of a competition about that. But Ontario usually gets the best bands because a west wind or even a slightly northwest wind, that's the most common with a really big cold outbreak. So we would usually get dumped on pretty darn good right there in my neck of the woods. So you want to get that long motion of the air over the lakes. So the eastern edges of the lakes are always going to be where the snow belts are.
So Tim, I see right now as we speak during this show, Buffalo is getting some pretty heavy banding. I'll flip it onto screen share here. Try to pull up the GRE. And you can see that usually takes a second to load, but some of that lake effect snow hitting Buffalo, and then also with our Datascope, with WeatherFlow's Datascope viewer, we have a couple of stations in that area. And it looks like these winds really started to crank up just a little while ago. And Crystal Beach, I think that's one of our stations, and the wind really cranked up at right about 6 o'clock. As soon as it went from northwest to southwest, I mean, it just turned on. I mean, you're talking about 15, 20 knot increase there, especially with gusts. Is that something typical for that area, and is that what you're talking about? Some of these winds are from the south, further down the lake, but it seems like that belting is actually going on from the eastern side of the lake.
Yeah, that band that we're looking at in Buffalo, you see the wind out of the southwest. That's why it's happening, just like we were talking about. That's why the band is forming right there where it is. It's a pretty strong wind. I think a lot of times when you have that same setup with that wind carrying along the lake, it's just like an onshore breeze over the ocean. There's no friction, so you can get that really strong wind to plow in with some of these bands as well. Greg alluded to it. You don't want too much wind because that can kind of hamper the building vertically of the bands a little bit. But that is a pretty strong wind that they have there. And the lake overwash a little bit. Many of you probably saw the picture earlier this week of a bar that was just caked in ice. That was in the Buffalo area. That car's not getting that anytime soon.
If I could jump in for a second, too, at some point.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Well, if you could go back to that map, because I think there's something interesting there. The shape of the lake also lends itself to convergence. So if you look at the winds, in Ontario, they're toward the center of the lake, and in Ohio and New York, they're toward the center of the lake, too. What you're actually picking up with the surface stations is convergence right down the middle, down right where that international border is, and the winds on either side of the lake are converging toward the center of the lake, and that really forces that band to be quite big. So it's the shape of the lake itself that's also helping to focus it, almost like a fire hose, literally, when you get a wind along it. Very interesting observations there.
Yeah, and Erie and Ontario are usually the best for the convergence. Like Greg said, the shapes of them are very similar. They're just oriented a little differently. but you can get that convergence to really just accentuate the upward motion in the middle of the lake. That air just runs into each other. It's got to go on. So it's making those bands even stronger than they would otherwise be.
So you're saying some of these southerly winds are actually feeding some warmth, or I'm sorry, not feeding warmth, but they're actually feeding this moisture across the lake in this kind of fashion?
They're a response to the rising motion over the center of the lake. So as the air over the center of the lake is rising, the air is coming in from the land. It's kind of like a land breeze, basically, that develops, converging into the center of the lake. So those winds are generated by the rising motion over the lake.
Right, and another thing about that, I'm looking at the station. I think it says 21-degree air temperature there. The lake temperature, I haven't checked. It's probably still in the 40s, Greg.
Yeah, the last I checked outside of Cleveland, and that's below, about 30 feet down, was 40 degrees.
Sure. So if you have air temperatures in the 20s and you have lake temperatures in the 40s, that's just like a sea breeze at the ocean in the summertime. It's the opposite. You're going to draw that wind from the land to the lower pressure created by those warmer lake waters. So that's creating the convergence that can make those really super bands. And this one that they're seeing now it's a good band. It's not a great band, but it is pretty good.
Yeah, we don't have any water temperature. I might could hunt for some water temperatures on the off screen, so I'll go ahead and unshare. But if I find it, I'll definitely get back to you on it.
And we all know, I mean, here on the East Coast has been a very warm start to winter. December was above normal. But my question to Tim, to you and Greg is, when do we see lake effect usually begin? Is it sooner for you in New York than it is maybe down where Greg is in Cleveland? What is the time frame that we actually start to see this kick in?
I guess I'll take it first. Whenever it gets cold. That is the simple answer. It's much easier to create lake effect at the beginning of winter while the lakes are at their warmest. This year is delayed because in the south here in the Carolinas we had one of the warmest Decembers ever. So did they. It was really warm there around Christmas time and Thanksgiving. I was up there at Thanksgiving to the beach walk on Ontario. It was quite warm. So their water temperatures are still warm too. So usually the beginning of winter, before the lakes start to chill down, is when you get that going. Greg mentioned most of the lakes usually freeze over, or at least Erie does. Ontario doesn't. There's maybe only been one time where it got close to freezing over. It's really deep, so it's about 800 or 900 feet deep, so it's hard to freeze these lakes. Erie is by far the shallowest, so they get to shut off that snow at some point once it freezes over, if it freezes over.
So okay, I've got some more information here, and that was going to lead to my next question. Was what is the temperature at which you start to see lake effect snow? I've seen some of the older methods use 15 to 25 degrees Celsius warmer than, or the air may have to be colder than that, and now it seems like it's more refined to right around 13 degrees Celsius difference.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the 15 to 20 degree difference before. When you talked about the beginning of lake effect, don't forget, it doesn't have to be snow. We had a cold air mass through here the last week of October, and we had lake effect rain. I mean, there were rain bands set up over Ashtabula, Geauga, and Lake counties. Eventually, there was some snow that mixed in, but because the water is so warm, the water temperatures were in the 50s at that time, maybe even near 60. The lake shore would get rain, and you wouldn't really get snow until you got to some higher elevation farther inland, but you could get lake effect rain. It's not really as much of a temperature, but a temperature gradient that kind of gets this process going, right? So, I mean, in the summer, you just don't have that. And it's not just, between the surface. You really have to look at the first, several thousand feet of the atmosphere. That's really where your gradient is, and that literally pulls the heat out of the lake. It's a heat transfer. Kind of like two opposing poles of a magnet. The stronger the two poles are, the stronger the pull between them. The bigger the difference between the temperature several thousand feet up in that lake surface, the more intense the actual snow or rain. Some of your heaviest lake effect snow could actually happen when the lake water temperatures are at their season coldest. 34, 33 degrees. You could still get dumped on, because that's the time of year later in the season when you can get a really strong Arctic air mass that could provide that gradient that you need. You don't necessarily need the water to be warm. You just need it to be water and not ice.
Right. Okay. So it looks like we have pretty cold water there, 32.9 degrees at Marblehead Buoy. I think over here it was slightly, could have been slightly warmer. Let's take a quick peek. Let that load for a second there. Thought it was reading earlier.
Some of those buoys may
water
also be very close to the shore. I know Cleveland's official water temperature is at the water intake where we get our drinking water from, and that's 8 miles out and 30 feet down to get a better measurement, because oftentimes near the surface you're going to get some varying water temperatures.
Okay. Yeah, like the water temperatures overall still look pretty cool. So if you get definitely 15 degrees at this location, Buffalo, reading 21.4 degrees. So you're in the upper teens to low 20s on your air temperatures, and your water temperatures probably sitting in the mid 30s or upper 30s, out in the middle.
Probably, yeah, upper 30s, I would think, especially a little bit deeper down.
Lake effect rain is a new one for me. I haven't heard that before. How common is that, or uncommon?
I mean, this was my first season, so I guess I saw it all here in Cleveland. I would think it would be more common earlier in the season when your air temperatures are warm, and more importantly, when your water temperatures are still warm. You're still drawing moisture off the lake. But you take a 30-mile or 25-mile-an-hour wind onshore with a water temperature in the 50s, and you're going to warm that air up by the time it gets inland. So I would think by November that would be unusual.
Yeah, you can get lake effect rain a lot of times in the early season, Ricky. Also, grapple is pretty common in a lot of these, especially early season lake bands. I don't know if I know exactly the reason for that. I guess it's a similar thing that still not quite cold enough, but you do get this grapple happening a lot. I have a lot of memories of November when we'd be outside for gym class and it would be fine, and then it would start grappling and then it would stop like 20 minutes later. That's pretty common in the early season stuff also.
And everyone called it hail too.
Yeah, we actually had it probably 3 or 4 days ago. I'll see if I can find it on my Twitter feed.
All right. And Peter has a question.
Yeah, whoever wants to answer this. We always hear about lake effect snow across the Great Lakes, but is there any other spots in the United States that get lake effect snow?
Good question. It can happen on smaller scales. I know it's been documented on Salt Lake before a couple times, I think. Someone mentioned, and I don't have the details about this, it was in another Carolina Weather Group discussion, but I believe it's Lake Parr in North Carolina. They had they have a satellite image of a very small lake band off that lake in northern North Carolina. I don't know when it happened. It was a while ago. A couple of weeks ago, we had Chesapeake Bay snow that got the Outer Banks. A lot of you probably saw that. Same concept. You get that, and it was a perfect north-northwest wind coming right down the spine of the Chesapeake Bay, and it kind of just got cold slightly at the end to clip some of the Outer Banks. So had snow. Some of the areas around Ricky's neck of the woods up in the north had some snow.
It was Cure Lake and Falls Lake, Tim. I found the article. It happened back January 22nd, 2014.
Yeah, I've heard definitely Salt Lake as one place that gets it. A lot of times you'll just see cloud streams coming off of lakes, especially the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. You'll get a nice cold wind, and you'll see cloud streaks coming off on the south side with a north wind. If those lakes were deeper and bigger sources of moisture, you'd get some lake effect off of those.
Joey, I think you had a few viewer questions to throw in there.
I do. I have 2 viewer questions from our longtime viewer, Lynn, who's a teacher in Burke County. Scotty, I think, worked with Lynn for a while. But she actually asked, have we, one of the questions we kind of answered, have we ever seen lake effect snow in North Carolina? Tim kind of mentioned that a second ago. There was also a lake effect event off of Lake Norman one time. I want to say it was like 98 or something. I'd have to go back and try to find it, but that did happen at one point. But her other question was, how does upstate New York get upwards of a few feet in one lake effect snow event?
Really good question. The easiest way to explain that, and I'm sharing my screen now, so you can see this is the seasonal snowfall for lake effect last year for the Buffalo National Weather Service forecast area. The way that you can get multiple feet in one event is very simple. You need to have the weather not change too much. So you want to have that cold air to keep flowing over the lake, preferably for a couple days, and you want the wind direction to not change. So think about it. If the wind direction is not changing, and I might screw up the screen share here. If the wind direction is not changing, you're going to keep that heavy snow band over the same areas. So here's a satellite image where we're looking at these snow bands. If those wind directions keep staying in the same spot, that band is going to keep dumping on the same town. It might oscillate 2 to 5 to 10 miles throughout the course of a day, but you could be getting snowfall rates in these bands well over 2, 3, 4 inches an hour. You can get dumped on really quickly. Earlier this week over Ontario, I believe it was Lewis County, someone got 30 inches of snow in about 28 hours, maybe. So that's not uncommon at all. And that's why, like, when you look at this snowfall map from Buffalo's Weather Service last year, the lighter shades here, these areas on this side of the lake, I guess they got maybe 50, 60 inches of snow, which, speaking as an upstate New Yorker, that's nothing for up there. That's not a lot of snow. But if you look over here, my hometown right over here, we had, I guess, about 140, which is pretty close to average. But here's that plateau where the elevation goes up about 700 feet. And they had, I'm trying to read the legend, I guess it's around 260. So you have more than 100 inches of difference just right there. But you can see there's another local medium here where there was probably a couple events where northwest was the better direction. And so Fulton, Oswego, they got dumped on more. And then here's the Buffalo area that got that crazy November system. And for them, the wind didn't change for a couple days. And they got 20 inches a day, 20 inches a day. And by the end of the week, they had 100 inches of snow in November.
And Tim and you and Greg can both talk to this. It's like you go 5 miles and you could be several feet of snow or just a couple of inches of snow. Kind of talk about how hard it is, especially for you, Greg, to forecast. This side of town could see a foot, and this side of town may see 2 inches.
So it's, first of all, from a viewer's perspective, they're very forgiving. And I've learned that very quickly, that, there is science to this, but there is also a little bit of luck. And these snow bands are so narrow, and you have to understand, not only are the snow bands narrow, but the clouds themselves are very low. And oftentimes, if you know the way weather radar works, it scans up as it goes away from the radar. Much of the actual snow is below the radar beam. So we may be looking at light snow on radar, but then, Jim from Geauga County calls in, and the radar is estimating 6 inches, but he says, no, I've got 18, in my backyard. So they're very forgiving, and they look for terms like primary snow belt. When I say that, that means Ashtabula, Geauga, and Lake counties are going to get snow. When I say secondary snow belt, that's going to include Cleveland. And the tricky part about this metro, and I'm sure it's the same way in Buffalo, is that Cleveland as a city is extremely wide east to west. So the airport is on the west side of the county, basically where Cleveland doesn't belong. It looks like Cleveland annexed the airport off of the other towns, whereas the east side of town is probably a good 15 miles, it feels like it, to the east. And there will literally be days where in Cleveland there'll be 0 to 10 inches of snow, because that's the range across the city. And there will be people coming in, to downtown for work, and there'll be folks coming in from the west side with beautiful clean cars, while in the same city, folks from the east side are coming in with, this much snow on the roof of their car, and everyone's wondering, where did you get that? And it's just amazing, the difference over just this county. The county that Cleveland is in basically is on the border between no lake effect snow and the snow belt, whereas one county to the east, not as big as on the Tug Hill Plateau, but you're averaging 140 to 180 inches of snow, and that's still within the driving limits for someone commuting into work to Cleveland. So it's very, very tricky, but people are very understanding of it. I think in television, it's all about it's communicating clearly and stressing what you know, and kind of glossing over the things that you may not be as sure about. And I think people are very understanding.
It's amazing to me that people in your area actually understand the primary band, the secondary snow band. It seems like kind of just a mentality growing up in the region. I guess very similar to how people in the southeast understand tornadoes and people on the coast understand hurricanes.
Oklahoma, right? I mean, you grew up in Oklahoma City, and I mean, I would never, even in Little Rock covering tornadoes, would I say that this is a grinder or this is an EF3, an EF4. Start calling them out on TV. That would never happen. That would never happen here in Cleveland. But when it comes to snow, I can say those things, and they know. People know and they understand, and they know how to prepare.
James?
Yeah, I would add to that too. That at least for my area, the upstate New York, Syracuse area, very weather savvy public. I mean, you think about it though. If the snow is going to rule your life for about 3 to 4 months out of the year, you're going to be really in tune with the weather. And people definitely know, like Greg was saying, what kinds of bands are we talking about. They understand that it can be snowing like crazy in one area, but if you drive 5 miles, you're probably going to drive out of it. So I think they're very forgiving with the forecast. They're understanding of the forecast that, hey, somewhere east of the lake here is probably going to get 12 inches, and then 20 miles north is probably going to get 2 or a trace. That's pretty well understood. I remember as a kid, everyone knew all the workings of lake effect snow pretty well. And I don't know when it happened, but somewhere within the last 10 years, lake effect snow went national. I don't know if it was well known beyond that area before that.
And if I could add one more thing too, is that the way we present the data has really changed. I mean, you pull up on our graphics system the RPM model that is provided by the graphics vendor, and this thing draws out very distinct looking lake effect snow bands, I mean, down to the town. And the problem is that the other models, because of their huge resolution, completely miss it. So you're left with showing what you've got, knowing that even though this information looks precise, it actually isn't. And that snow band could actually be 5 miles in a different direction, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I think it's very important that you communicate, okay, I know you're seeing this on this computer model right here, but just understand, this isn't reality, this isn't the radar, it's a guess to the future, and this is not the way things may work out tomorrow.
I think James has a question about forecasting.
Yeah, Greg, you mentioned science and technology, so I was just wondering if there's anything that's maybe being researched or fighting for funding dollars, or maybe not even out yet, that could be implemented in the future to help us overcome some of the shortfalls of forecasting these things. Does anything come to mind for you?
I don't know of anything specific other than, and I mean, you'd want models that resolution, but in a way, sometimes the more resolution yours, I think it's educating. I think a lot of it is also educating yourself when it comes to this. I know last year, and then again this year, before this last lake effect snow event, I used a software called BuffKit to help me forecast. I used it in Arkansas for severe weather. It's really made for snow and lake effect snow, and I use it here for forecasting. And I went through the modules. I went through through the coursework again, just to refresh my memory, because you can take the model data, but you've got to kind of connect it with your own knowledge. And okay, when this pattern sets up, this is what's going to happen. And I'm sure Tim, you kind of growing up there, I've seen the same thing. You see a certain pattern develop, and you kind of already know what the lake is going to do.
Yeah, and Greg, you're right. It's actually not hard to look at a broader pattern and say there's definitely going to be lake snow. That's actually pretty easy. You can probably do it 5 to 7 days ahead of time. But fine-tuning that is just a nightmare. And I've actually never really had to forecast lake effect snow. I was a kid there. I went out to college at Penn State. We didn't really get that much there. And then I moved south to North Carolina. So I've never professionally been under fire up there for forecasting. But you were asking about research. There was a project last year. The acronym is OWLES. I don't remember what it stood for. But you were familiar probably with Project Vortex for tornadoes that they were doing. They were doing a similar project for lake effect snow, and they were quote-unquote hunting and chasing lake effect snow for months, primarily based along Ontario. And they had Doppler on wheels that were going up there and sampling a lot of the really good lake bands to try and see what's going on in there. The processes that guide these are convection-based processes, so it's a lot like what you would find in some thunderstorms. So they were up there doing a lot of research. I'm sure they'll be publishing some findings soon. And it was out of the SUNY Oswego area, which is Oswego just north of Syracuse. They have a really good lake program, meteorology program. And so that will be interesting to see what we learn out of that.
So that would help. I mean, that kind of answers part of the question. I think just like in other parts of the country, a denser radar network would certainly help. I guess maybe not as much forecast, but nowcast. To give good current information. Maybe some of these larger metropolitan areas, as they do grow along the lakes, maybe we need to up the density of radar, or maybe use some sort of local smaller radars where we can get at these bands from different direction. Because one county here that to the east of Cleveland, Ashtabula, there on the Pennsylvania state line, you often see these lake effect snow bands on radar, and they look strong, and then as they point toward Ashtabula, it looks like they're falling apart, when in fact it's still snowing there. It's just that the entire snow event is underneath the radar beam. So you're forecasting and even nowcasting blind.
And we run into that radar problem here a lot of times too, just in other ways in the Charlotte area. We've discussed that before, but certainly no.
I was blown away, by the way, when I found out that Charlotte does not have a radar site close to it. I was absolutely blown away that such a large metro is without it.
We've been preaching for years, and there's some legislation now, as Brad may have mentioned, but we'll see where that takes us. And Tim's the same deal up in his area, with not a incredible radar coverage either. But so we've got about 20 minutes or so left, and I want to segue a little bit, if none of our other panel members have any additional questions, into more stories, because Tim grew up in the area. I think Scotty's got one, so we'll toss to Scotty first. But a lot of our viewers enjoy hearing the stories about the big lake effect snows. And Greg, I know you're new to Cleveland, but I imagine you've got at least one or two stories of some big snow event that's happened. So we'll segue into that right after Scotty's question.
Well, it may deal with your stories because we were talking about the convective nature. Talk about the effects of thunder snow in these lake effect snows. I mean, we see videos all the time coming out of Buffalo with thunder snow. So maybe kind of talk about that setup, and then we can segue into stories.
Well, yeah, I can start. I didn't know when I grew up. I didn't know that thunder snow was a weird thing. I kind of thought that just happened everywhere, but it doesn't. The reason, though, that you get thunder snow, of course, is when you get really, really fast upward motion within a snow squall. Just like you would find in a thunderstorm, this really fast upward motion can create the charge separation needed to make some lightning. And that's what happens pretty frequently in the really big lake bands that you can get. These are going to have to be the one big single band going along the whole length of a lake that's really strong. You can get the thunder snow to happen. And it's not that uncommon. I know that I saw some tweets about it last week up that way. I don't know if we have any here on the radar we're looking at in Buffalo now. Probably not quite strong enough. And as you look at this radar, you can almost kind of guess the wind directions just by looking at the radar. See how the band is kind of falling apart over parts of Ontario now? It looks like you have that nice big southwest fetch, and now that's not really the case anymore. So it's kind of getting disrupted. Probably in a couple hours, it's dead. Looking at this.
I think Shay has a question before we transition into stories right quick.
Yeah, I was wondering. I'm watching this band lifting and on that southwest wind, and it just sort of, I thought of wind speeds and quality of wind and what it means for how much snow is going to fall in your area when you're deciding on the forecast. Because I know the high resolution models only take you so far, and then the rest of it's kind of on you. Have you developed any kind of simple formula or some sort of way of monitoring wind speeds and how that affects how much snow is going to fall? If you are able to gauge on the modeled wind speeds for how much time it's going to occur from from X direction, how much snow you might be looking at. Is that something you've tried to do before?
I'm sorry, was that addressed to me? I lost you there at the beginning.
Yes.
You know, I haven't gotten a good feel for the wind. I got to tell you that. There was one event earlier in the season that looked like we were going to get some really good lake effect snow, and the winds in the models looked like they were going to give us a good event, and then they ended up being over what we actually were thinking was going to happen, and the bands just never really materialized. You know, the air doesn't just have to pass over the lake. You've got to give it enough time over the lake to pick up moisture and to actually get the process started. So sometimes, especially with Lake Erie for Cleveland, because you're passing over the narrow length of the lake, you can't be going too quickly. You've kind of got to let things marinate. A lot of times, what I've used is BuffKit. It's a piece of software that does have the wind, and I look at direction. You got to have winds from the same direction over several thousand feet. I look at the speeds to stay below 35, 30 miles per hour. And then just like with thunderstorms, if some of you guys are, but some of your viewers maybe, you look at CAPE. There's actually lake-induced CAPE is what it's called. I mean, these are winter thunderstorms, and the lake itself produces CAPE, just like you would in severe weather. And you look at that to try to gauge how strong those lake bands are going to be and how much upward motion you're going to be. We had an event back in November that came on shore. It was just a brief event in the morning, but it was very intense. And we had 16 lightning strikes in 15 minutes from that band as it was over Lake County. It was during the day. We had a reporter there, and she said it was blinding. I've seen it before, not in lake effect snow in Connecticut. Sometimes you would get it with developing nor'easters off the East Coast. You would get some lightning and thunder, but these bands really produce it much more consistently than any other kind of snow event.
Alrighty. So I'm going to let Tim or Greg go first. We'll let Tim go first. He grew up with it more than Greg did, so he may have some more memories. Let's talk a little bit about some of your fondest memories growing up as a child and dealing with lake effect snow.
Yeah, sure. There are good memories and there are bad memories, I can say. You would always get snow. We had a sliding glass door in the back of our house that opened up to a deck, and sometimes the snow would be about half high. Sometimes it would be a little higher. Sometimes the wind would blow like crazy and it would cover most of the door. So that was a good way to gauge things. My birthday is in December, a couple days after Christmas, and I had a lot of birthday parties that would get canceled because of the big crazy lake snows that kept on coming. So those were bad memories for that. I have a couple pictures. I can probably share them.
Oh, there's the weather cat too.
My cat is on the table now, affectionately looking at the radar. All right, let's see. I went home on a visit from college one year. I guess these pictures are from 20. So this is my house. Can you guys see this?
Yep.
All right, so there's the snow. There's a shoveled path to the front door. I don't know how. This is out my back deck. You can see the snow kind of really just covering up everything. We would try and shovel a deck to the path to the hot tub on the deck. That was a futile effort at times. So there's a lot of the snow just piled up. It's just constant, you know. This is pretty common stuff. Here's a better idea of us snow blowing the driveway all the time. 3, 4, 5 foot snowbanks. Pretty common. This is one of my favorite lake effect videos too. If y'all haven't seen this, this is a time-lapse video of Buffalo from the big Snowmageddon, Snowvember thing that they had last year. This was taken from downtown Buffalo, and you can see they have maybe a couple inches on the ground, but this is going on south of the city. You can see the clouds, you can see the convective motion, you can see the snow itself. Here's a different angle, and the snowband getting closer and closer to the webcam. It really gives you an idea of what they deal with in these really big, crazy days. You can see the rising air going up into the clouds. It's really, really cool to see. So it's always fun to chase these things. I would chase them a couple times, and then I almost got in trouble once going into an area I shouldn't have gone to and maybe gone off the road, so I stopped doing that.
Tim, what was that? What was the name of that video for some of our audio listeners?
It's called Time Lapse of Buffalo Lake Effect Snow. It's from November of last year.
Very good.
Yeah, that's an incredible video. I remember seeing that when it came out and thinking, wow, that I can't believe how fine of a line that is, where one side of it, I think they got about 6 or 8 inches, and then you're talking 3 feet and a quarter of a mile, and then 5 to 7 feet just inland. Just incredible.
That was a really big one. We had a couple ones like that. There was one year where I think it was a week in February, and it wasn't maybe as good as the Buffalo one, but somewhere in our county got about 100 inches. Where I grew up is about 30 miles north of Syracuse. The 100-inch zone is about 20 miles north of Syracuse, and Syracuse itself, I think they got like inches of snow over 5 days. So it just depends.
All right, Greg.
So obviously I don't have stories of crazy snowfall. I did not grow up in it, but I got to tell you, my station is located in probably one of the best locations in the country. So the station is on Lake Erie in downtown Cleveland. In front of us is nothing but railroad tracks, an airport, and then the lake. There's an airport there on the lake, and we have patios overlooking the lake itself. So I shoot time lapses and I shoot photos out there all the time. So one of these days there's going to be an amazing time lapse of a lake effect snowband. And anytime Buffalo's getting hit, that band, the clouds, they start right off the coast of Cleveland, so we can see the snow coming in. So let me see if I can. This was actually from this morning, and this lake effect snowband was lined up. That's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on the left. And the clouds there, that's the lake effect snowband that was pointed into northeast Ohio, into Lake and Ashtabula County. We're watching it all morning long, and you can actually see sometimes the snow. This was a little bit later in the day when it was weaker. Earlier, you could clearly see the snow falling out of that. And then this is what it looked like this morning with that snowband. This is a time lapse I shot off of our patio. And you can actually see the snowband feeding that moisture into Lake and Ashtabula County. The whole thing pans around back toward the Rock Hall. And you see that the sun was peeking out where we are here in downtown Cleveland. Sometimes when these things get really active, you could literally see the clouds bubbling if it's clear enough, if it's delineated enough over the lake. Just some amazing views. And what always amazes me is how clear the demarcation is between Sunshine, where their station is, and this crazy snowband that I see on radar just outside my window, and how quickly, the weather goes from sunny downtown to just this amazing snowfall not too far away. It really is amazing. So. And you guys will see more and more of these. I have a YouTube page and an Instagram at Greg Do Weather where I post these all the time. I've got a little camera that I basically set up all the time for anything out there, and I've gotten some amazing time lapses, and hopefully there'll be some good ones of lake effect.
Is that the airport there in the distance too, where the air shows held?
That's Burke Lakefront Airport. So that's the commercial. That's the non-commercial airport. That's where you would fly in if you're LeBron James or if you're playing the Indians or the Cavs. You fly in over there. We see their airplanes all the time. But yeah, the main airport where the observations are taken, that's about 10 miles to the southwest, and that's a whole different climate. I wouldn't even count that as Cleveland.
Gotcha. My friends go to the big air show in Cleveland every single year, so they park in a parking garage very nearby to where it looks like your station is.
They can watch it from the patio of our station, yeah.
All right, so I'm coming down there in a few years.
Okay.
We're gonna
hey,
watch
man, we've got some amazing facilities. I'll give you a tour, absolutely.
All righty, good deal. All right, Scotty, we're about 5 minutes before 9 o'clock. Any additional questions?
I think we're good. At least I am. Anybody else have anything? All right. I guess we're good. Well, guys, we appreciate it. Greg, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Maybe we can get you back in April. We always do severe weather month in April. So.
Oh man, I love severe weather, and I don't get enough of it here. So if you want some tornado stories, I've got plenty.
But definitely love to have you on.
Yeah, water spouts too. Actually, yeah, I'll send you some pictures. The lake produces a lot of water spouts, so we can talk about that too.
Hey, that might be another show topic right there, water spouts. I know Shay would like that.
Hey.
All right, well, Greg, we appreciate it, and feel free to stick around. We're going to kind of go into talking about the possibility of maybe a little winter weather here in the Carolinas this weekend. We're going to kind of transition to that, and Shay's going to give us an update. He's our tropical weather expert. He's going to give us an update on subtropical storm Alex that's formed in January, and I believe, Shay, you said this is only the 4th time that this has happened in history, I guess.
Yeah, that's correct. The last one was 1978. It's pretty fascinating to see, especially given our pattern, our El Nino pattern in the subtropical jet remaining a little further north than normal. It's just now starting to recede to the south, but not before keeping the sea surface temperatures warm enough to give a little bit of fuel to a low pressure system that came off of the Florida coast and into the Bahamas earlier or mid last week, and it really swept through Bermuda with gale force winds. It was really. Let's screen share this. See if I can't get something up on screen. We'll go ahead and show you what the latest National Hurricane Center. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So Alex right now, as of 5 p.m., they normally would only do a 1 o'clock p.m. update. They went ahead and did another advisory this afternoon to upgrade the storm. Once they tagged a 70% chance, it's 990 millibars. GFS and the Euro models are holding this for a couple more days, and they both were pretty much in agreement with the strength and the track of the storm. It's going to take it to the north, gradually more to the north, and then up towards Greenland. So, it's going to move over, transition over colder waters here in the next 24 to 48 hours. But it's really been a long ride watching this storm. And if we look at the earth.nolaschool.net map, you can see the surface low right here. Now, what's unique about this system is that this whole area of the Atlantic, even with the warmer sea surface temperatures, was really just a large baroclinic zone. So there was fronts forming and cyclogenesis and cooler water from the north and warmer air coming up from the south, and it's sort of a battlefield for this storm as it went right across Bermuda and has, I'm sorry, move the track a little bit more this way and starting to turn more to the north now. So the storm has really come a long way. It just started to get some tropical characteristics over the last 24 hours. I saw yesterday where there was a crease in the atmosphere where the cooler air was still trying to battle it and warmer air trying to fight it from the the eastern side, and it was just not able to win. Plus it had dry air on the northwest and western side that was wrapping into the core, and now we're seeing it sort of develop. And another thing we always look for with these storms is you see the surface low here. We go higher up in the atmosphere, about 18,000 feet, we always want to look for a mid-level low to be stacked on top of that surface low, and it's dead center. So that means you have a healthy system developing, and it has healthy exhaust to go up for the air to rise. And if we go even higher up, today I saw that there was an actual somewhat of a closed upper low, but now it's still there, but it's more of a dipping trough at this point. But you can also see in this map how the upper level shear is more relaxed for the system, and that's always a good sign that it's able to get some moisture wrapped around the core of it. So it's pretty interesting. One of the main reasons for it being successful as a system is because of this high pressure to the north, And when you have a low pressure to the south, high to the north, you get a Rex block set up where you have additional vorticity coming down from the north to keep the spin on it. So it's been with it the whole time across the Atlantic Ocean. These two have been traveling together, sort of feeding off of each other, and that's one of the main reasons why this storm has really been able to stay compact around the center and fight off that dry air, especially with that top spin. High pressure was stronger a couple of days ago, but just enough to keep it going. So it's going to head off to the northeast and then eventually to the north, and it's going to move over some colder water and probably fall apart. But let me see what the National Hurricane Center, there's its track right there, so it's going to move up into this area. It could remain a extratropical or possible depression at some point, but just the fact that we have a subtropical storm on January 13th is pretty significant.
I haven't been following this too closely because it's January and I've got snow problems to deal with in my area. But are they expecting it to become fully tropical in nature?
No, I don't think so because of the direction it's going now. The sea surface temperatures that it was over, it was heading into warmer waters. Now it's going to start moving over to cooler waters. I think it's sitting at about 22 degrees Celsius at this point. And here's the map. Storm is going to be right about here. And it's right along the line of starting to get transitioned into these cooler waters up here. It's going to become extratropical at some point.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Yeah, so I never thought we'd be talking about tropical systems in January, and we haven't even talked about the potential of winter weather in the Carolinas until now. Very weird situation going on where two of our models, long-range models, are kind of battling back and forth. One has the idea of some wintry precipitation. The other one doesn't have it at all. So Tim and everyone else, I want to bring you guys in. Let's kind of talk about the situation that's coming up. I think, first of all, for all of us in the Carolinas, we need to look at the potential we could pick up around a half an inch to an inch of rain on Friday before our attention turns to Sunday now.
I think that's the key, Scotty, is we're dealing with two separate systems here, and I made a map earlier today kind of detailing the first system moving in, bringing the rain on Friday, and then the secondary low, where and when that forms and tracks is going to be key. Let's screen share some of my stuff here if I can. Let me drag this other screen out, and hopefully it'll let me share it. There we go. So hopefully everyone can see this now. This is going to be the GFS model, which throughout the last, say, 24 hours or so has been trying to get a little more snowy in nature. So this is sitting early Friday morning right now. And we're going to step it through time. We're going to go out to late day Friday, and you notice there's that first low that kind of moves right near the North Carolina coastline, bringing some gusty winds to the coast and some potential for some heavy rainfall as well, maybe a couple of thunderstorms. Western portion of North Carolina, the GFS is trying to bring us a little bit of freezing rain and some rain showers. In my area, I think we're going to be dealing with more rain showers and then maybe a transition over to some snow showers on the backside as some cooler air wraps in as we go in the day on Saturday. But notice that low then pulls away. Then, let's back it up a little bit. Notice the L over Texas. That's our system potentially for Sunday that we're watching. And that system and the energy associated with it comes diving into the Gulf of Mexico. And the GFS model develops a low further north than the European does and then tracks it across Florida, creating a nice moisture field all across North Carolina that combines with our northern jet stream and has some cooler air wrapped in. Now, this is the 18Z run of the GFS, so this evening's run. And earlier in the 12Z run, it had this low a little bit closer to the coast, a little bit stronger, and also had a little bit of a greater snow region than this run does. So amounts were a little bit higher. Now, granted, it's 4 or 5 days out, and we don't need to be talking about amounts, more of just storm track and if the cold air and moisture is there. But it's intriguing, Tim and everyone else, to see a model that has some decent ensemble support, too. It's alone right now in its thinking versus the European and everything else.
Yeah. I still don't know if I buy. I'm thinking if I buy the GFS right now or not, and I think we're all thinking that. Something just doesn't feel quite right with it. the storm track coming out of the Colorado low is not usually what you would expect for a snowmaker for us. And it seems like the polar jet is more the driving force with that second system rather than the really active subtropical jet that we usually have. But the GFS is really consistent with it ever since the beginning of, I don't know, what has it been, 2 days now? Probably 5, 6, 7 runs in a row it's at it. So you can't ignore that. The NAM just starting to come in. That's kind of still a little too far under the NAM scale to really get a good sense of what it wants to do. But the Euro, it's as persistent as ever, saying no storm. I had a map earlier today. Bear with my tunnel vision here as I screenshot to get this map. So here's the GFS from the 12Z, which Ricky added was the snowier run, the stronger run closer to the coast. And then here's the Euro at the same time step. The 12Z Euro. We're still waiting on the new one tonight to see what it does. But you can see this one has the low closer to Cuba than the Outer Banks. And this is at the same time. So they're both digging their heels in. They're not budging. It's going to be a fun battle to see who wins out here. I would guess that we get a better idea maybe tomorrow. But that's what we always say, isn't it? So we'll see. We'll see who bends to the other, and we'll see what the name has to say.
And I think possibly with the GFS, why we're kind of scratching our heads is we don't see that high pressure parked to the northeast of us that's really pumping in that cold air. And that's something that for us to have snow in the Carolinas, that's almost a must for us to have. So with the GFS picking up the snow without that high there, you don't know how to decipher the information it's given you. But I'm with Tim with the consistency that it's shown over the past several days. It's hard to dismiss it because it has been so consistent.
And we're looking at trends, Scotty and Tim, and looking at the European trends, it's not really budging much, but the GFS has kind of trended this more of a wetter solution, and a slightly deeper solution brings us a little more snow over the past couple of days. So it's like, which one do you want to hedge your bets on when you're talking about trends and modeling and everything else over time? And by the way, before I get in trouble, I need to mention hi, Erica, because she's supposed to come up here this weekend, and we're talking about snow, and the reason she may not is because of snow. So appropriate timing, I thought.
Yeah, and what do you guys, James and Shay, Joey, what are you guys seeing? What is your thoughts on this? I mean, normally the Euro has a better track record per se. I couldn't give you the statistics to it, but just going off of previous storms, you know, the Euro has a better track, but then the GFS, like we've been talking about, is so consistent. I mean, what are you guys thinking? Not everybody at once.
I'll say, you know, it really comes down to, you know, I like to look at the 500 millibar geopotential height and anomaly, and watch where this surge of Arctic air is going to come down from the north. And without that high pressure to our north, it's actually high pressure coming down over the northern tier states. I think this time, in the model solution is wedging some cooler air mass down into the southeast region. So. You know, it's a matter of which scenario is going to play out as far as where the cool air is going to come from, when, and how much, how cold it's going to actually be. So, you know, I was looking at these models about 5 days ago, and they showed the snow actually reaching Charleston, but you know, it's too far out. I still think the initialization for the GFS on these kind of systems, especially when you have a subtropical jet just over Florida, your polar jet's dipping down from the north over the northeastern United States instead of a real strong Rossby coming down central United States and really pulling that cold air down, and that's where it gets really tricky. So that's why I don't really. It's not that I don't trust the GFS. I just don't know about the initialization on it.
I think a really good graphic, and I'm going to share it. It's actually from Tim's station, so maybe Tim hasn't even seen this yet, but your friend Grant just shared this, talking about what they know and don't know. And I'm going to steal the coloring on this graphic because I like it too. But
oh, nice.
So Grant is talking about kind of the differences between the two models, and right now what pretty confident in is that if we get any event, it would probably happen on a Sunday, and then if we get that northerly track, it's going to bring some snow, but confidence still pretty low with that, and of course time is going to reveal more details, and still things that are a little too early to nail down if an area of low pressure even develops down the Gulf, what the track is, what the precip is, whether there's moisture, and of course type, and whether it's snow or rain or maybe some other type of precipitation. So nice graph for Brand, I thought.
I think we're going to see quite a few more of these coastal lows over the next week or two with this pattern we have in place. It seems to want to lock in, and so there may be more opportunities here than just this weekend. So I think, just like I said, it always depends on how much Arctic air is going to spill down with the negative Arctic oscillation going on right now. That could be any week now.
I think it's a matter of when, not if. We'll get something in the next several weeks, certainly this winter. It's going to happen. It's just, I don't know that this is not really screaming a classic storm for us. The setup is not classic. I could certainly see it happening, but I'm a little skeptical. Let me share two. I have here it's the ensemble plume for the European. This is for Greensboro. The operational has not had the storm at all. But the ensembles here, we're looking at about 50 members total. I was just counting up about 19 to 20 of them at least put a trace of snow in Greensboro on Sunday. So that's a little less than half of the ensembles are seeing something within the Euro. So we don't need to say that it doesn't have it at all. It just hasn't been putting it out into the operational, and it seems to be certainly weaker even with the ensembles. The max I can find is even about 2 inches. So that creates an ensemble like a tenth of an inch or something. But just some more food for thought there. It does have something, it's just not been latching onto it like the GPS does.
And for us in Bristol, we're a little bit snowier. I hadn't even looked at this yet, but taking a gander at it now, we've got a few more members that are throwing out some snow in the near term as we head into the weekend. I'm not going to count them all, but that looks like at least maybe 25 or 30 as we head into the weekend. Now notice most of them are still around that inch range, nothing too major. But as Tim mentions, we go later into the time period, and Shay mentioned this too, more potential. And for us, we get a lot of more northwest flow snow events in Bristol and the Tri-Cities region. They give us some light dustings every once in a while. And that's, I think, what we're seeing in the long term as we head towards the middle portion of next week. Another little disturbance rides south and east.
Yeah, one little nifty tool, we always talk about what tools to use. I don't know if anybody's ever used a plume viewer, but it is starting to show. It's one of my favorite things to use for rainfall. It shows the ensembles, and you can see where it's starting to pick up on snowfall in the Greensboro area. Just a couple of members there, but this is going a little far into time, so the higher resolution on this only takes it out to a certain point. So definitely another tool to watch for that area, and I think there's several of them down this map down here. You have Tennessee, Raleigh, Greensboro. So yeah, there's several in that bag of tricks there.
All right, guys. Well, we'll kind of wrap everything up. It is going to be kind of a wait-and-see period, I think, like Tim said just a little bit ago. As we get into tomorrow and definitely by Friday, we should have a better idea of what's going to happen. Consequently enough, just a little side note for me. As you all know, I'm a big Panthers fan, and on my bucket list is to see a game in the snow in Charlotte. So I'm kind of rooting for it because I just want to see the Panthers play in the snow. So, and I think it may give us a better chance at beating Seattle. So, bring on the snow. But it is going to be kind of a wait-and-see approach. So definitely stay tuned to Tim. He's a great follower. Follow on Twitter and Facebook. And I do want to promote Greg D's Twitter. It's at GregDWX on Twitter and on Instagram. And you can just look him up on Facebook and like his page. And James, we didn't get your thoughts. What are you thinking quickly about what we could see towards the end of the weekend?
I was just trying to look at some of the more data too, and even if we do go with this scenario, I think where, let's just say hypothetically for a second, we do get some snow. Just last winter we had an event where here in Charlotte, one side of 85 got snow and the other side got rain. So I mean, this could really be kind of a localized who gets flakes and who doesn't, if we even put snow in the forecast to begin with. So I think it's kind of like you said, wait and see at this point out.
It is. And Joey, I don't know if you're there. I can't remember the exact date, but it was a couple of years ago. I think we had a situation that was fairly similar to what we've got going on right now, and it did paint out to have a little bit of snow here in the Western Carolinas. Do you remember that?
Yeah, there's been a couple of them. My thoughts on this weekend, I've got a couple of rules for forecasting winter events. Anyway, I won't get into all those. But anyway, one thing though, this storm hasn't even come onto the coast yet, so we don't have a lot of good data to even be looking at these models at this point. You got to remember that. And the second thing, a lot of our, it's not the typical storm, obviously. So I don't ever like to trust any of the models whenever we're looking at something totally different. You almost can throw all of them out if it's not a classic, setup. But a consistent GFS is rare. So you have to remember that. But I definitely think we need to wait till the storm either forms or gets on the coast. In this case, gets on the coast. Once that happens, then at least maybe we'll get a little bit better of an idea. And I always say don't ever forecast a winter storm until the NAM comes in. So
that's a good rule. And it's not because you want to look at the NAM; it's just because you're closer.
That's right.
All right, guys. Well, we'll go ahead and sign off. Next week, we're going to be actually talking about something really not weather related, but we're going to be talking about earthquakes. Shay has lined us up a few guests, and we've got one of Joey's friends. I forget his name at the moment, but he actually lives out in Oklahoma City, so he's been rocking and rolling, it seems like, for the past several months out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about earthquakes and how they are really taking off in the Midwest and even down where Shay lives. See, there's been a few earthquakes in the Charleston area as well.
Scotty, you say that it's not weather related, but I'm sure Tim can vouch for this. It seems like earthquakes go straight to the meteorology department, right?
We always get the calls. Yes, for sure.
So that's one reason why we kind of touched on this. The same way we touched on space weather, things in space, because it always seems like those just seem to go hand in hand. So
I think the meteorologists, we have a much faster reach to a larger audience.
It was so funny. We had that Valentine's Day earthquake a couple years ago in North Carolina. Well, it wasn't North Carolina, but we had the impacts felt in some parts of Charlotte. And I was at NBC Charlotte with Brad that time, and the lights started to shake in the studio. And that's how I became aware of it. And Panovich wasn't in the room at the moment, and he walked back in. I'm like, I think we just had an earthquake or something. And so he jumps on Twitter, and his notifications were blowing up like crazy. And that's how we learned about it, was through the following.
Ricky, that wasn't an earthquake. That was the first time that Stacy decided to actually go out on a date with me for Valentine's.
Ooh, yeah.
And on that note, we will end. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next week, and enjoy the weather, because it's the only weather you have. I'm still in a Joe Bastardi line there, because Big Joe's been hitting on some winter storms coming up our way in the next few weeks. So, anyways, enough blabbering. Have a good one. We'll see you next week.
Bye, Zego.